Protesters in China's largest city crying down with the Chinese Communist Party and down with Xi Jinping.
Bloody shootouts erupt, citizens kill officials, social revenge and riots explode as China's economy teeters on the edge.
Things are getting out of hand in China. Just 2 weeks ago, we had pro-democracy banners go up in a major Chinese city, and now riots are erupting all across the country. In fact, in one city, things got so out of hand that we had a protester kill a CCP official, and the public was celebrating the death. We had one Chinese commenter say publicly that under economic hardship, the CCP's evil doing will spark public retaliation. Comments like these are worrying Xi Jinping because they are threatening the CCP's rule.
But I don't think that they can sustain it for too much longer. And there's a couple of reasons. Xi Jinping, because he's turned his back on consumption as being the fundamental basis of the Chinese economy, there's only one way out to rescue an increasingly grim situation, and that is to export more. China's not growing at the 5.0% pace reported for last year. It may not even be growing at all. But we know the trend is down because we can see price signals that suggest, actually, who scream deflation. But even if China were growing at 5.0, it probably wouldn't be growing fast enough for those guys to pay back debt. China not only has a problem with Trump at this moment, China not only has a problem with an economy that looks like it's contracting, China has now its 2008. In 2008, they did not want to suffer a recession. So they overstimulated their economy, they piled on the debt, and now that debt is just too heavy. So you've got all of these crises hitting at the same time. And so Xi Jinping, who a couple months ago, he looked like he was going to rule the world, right now, he's going to be lucky just to wake up alive in the morning.
That beating had to do with the Chinese mortgage crisis, which has only gotten worse since the tariff war has started. Now, last time we made a video on the China's mortgage crisis and the protests that were taking place in the country because of it, our video was demonetized and restricted within few hours of the upload. To us, it didn't make sense. Why? Because we talk about protests in many different countries, and for some reason, this specific video was restricted and not the other ones. Well, more than a year after we published that video, YouTube decided that it had made a mistake and it decided to unrestrict and monetize our video. Now, we have a feeling that since we're talking about the same subject today, this video may also get demonetized and restricted. So if you guys can help us out and hit that like and subscribe button down below and share it on your social media, that way we won't need the YouTube algorithm. Now, before we talk about the mortgage crisis, I quickly want to go over the democracy protest that took place in China just 2 weeks ago. So this happened on April the 15th or maybe April the 14th, so roughly 2 weeks ago, and this is the report. Massive banners demanding political change were hung from an elevated bridge in Chengdu, China, reading, "Without political system reform, there will be no national rejuvenation. The people do not need a political party with unchecked power. China does not need anyone to point out the direction. Democracy is the direction." The protester behind this bold act shared a photo of the scene before he was forcefully disappeared. Now, you guys can assume what that means, but we do have more information about the protester now. But before we get to that, let's finish this report. He revealed that he had spent an entire year preparing for this moment, determined that it be seen and remembered no matter the cost. His final words before all contact was lost were, "All I wish is for democracy in China." Foreigners do not understand the courage it takes to do this. Nobody suffers more at the hands of the CCP than the Chinese people, and it seems they are finally speaking up. In a second, we'll get into a report of Chinese youth getting on Chinese social media, which is highly censored, and calling out Xi Jinping directly. But before we get to that, I do want to cover a little bit more about where these banners were hung. You see, the city was very appropriately picked. Chengdu is the same city that TikTok influencers from the US always ooh and ah from and tell everyone that they don't know the real China. So here's a reminder that just like any other country, the real version of itself has many different versions. The difference is, in an authoritarian country, people aren't allowed to openly criticize the versions of a country that the government doesn't want you to see. But every so often, we get reminders that there is a whole lot going on beneath the surface that people stay silent on. Well, now it seems that the Chinese people are speaking up, and this protest was just the beginning. But before we get to other protests, here's what we know about this activist. Now, before I read this report, I do want to mention for everyone who might be worried that this protester is already in CCP custody, so we're not putting him at risk by sharing his picture. In fact, this picture has been making rounds on Chinese social media already. The activist who hung the banners over the overpass in Chengdu is named Mile Xinlin, a 27-year-old from Sichuan. According to him, these banners have been prepared for a year. Before the action, he encountered a labor dispute with Shenzhen Board Vision Hinjuan Technology. During the process of complaining to the Labor Inspection Department, the staff passed the buck in various ways, even hung up the phone before he could finish explaining the situation. Now, this may seem like a trivial matter, but we have to realize this was likely one of many things that's bothering the Chinese population, and this is what pushed him over the edge. Remember the Arab Spring in Middle East? It started in Tunisia when a produce vendor had his cart seized by the authorities, and when he went on to complain about it, they just laughed him off. So he set himself on fire to protest the authoritarian regime, and within weeks of that happening, the government had fallen. And again, that's not to say that that will happen in China, but we have to keep in mind that a lot of big protests start off as a small event, and it seems that's happening in China already. Here we have another teenager complaining publicly about the way Xi Jinping is dealing with this trade war.
最近中美又开始打贸易战了。
Recently, China and the US have started fighting the trade war again. The US says they'll raise tariffs, and the CCP immediately says they'll fight to the end. It sounds strong and full of backbone, but think about it. Who's really suffering? It's not the officials or the rich, it's us, the common people. Look at life now. The prices go up every year. Eggs are expensive. Meat is expensive, and fruit is even more expensive. Young people can't find jobs. After graduation, they're unemployed. Internet layoffs, factory closures, small businesses closing down. But the CCP isn't thinking about how to save the economy. Instead, they keep cracking down on private enterprises while fighting the US in the tariff war. They claim it's to protect national interests. But who is the country? Isn't it us? Our jobs are in danger, and they're talking about sovereignty and toughness. What's the point? The US raises tariffs, and China immediately retaliates. It may look like a back and forth, but the real cost is being paid by us, the common people. Factory orders are gone, foreign trade is in chaos, workers are laid off, and bosses are running away. There's no protection for people's livelihoods. The CCP always says it doesn't start trouble, but isn't it causing trouble now? If the country's leader really cared about the people, they would focus on making our lives better, not just making a tough face for show. There are no winners in a trade war. It's about power and wisdom. When they say they'll fight to the end, they're gambling with people's livelihoods. In the end, they fight, but we starve. We don't want to be dragged into this. We don't want to pay the price for their struggle. We just want a stable job, food on the table, and a peaceful life. It's that simple.
Unfortunately for the CCP, their problems do not just stop there. If you guys have been following the channel, we've been talking about it, how China's economy is unsustainable, and that was even before the tariff war started. You see, China has been having the mortgage crisis that has been the bane of its existence. Well, things haven't gotten much better for the CCP. And Chinese citizens are still very angry about the CCP officials messing up their future. Here you can see protesters protesting against unfinished building projects. Owners of unfinished buildings were beaten and arrested by police for defending their rights at the government office of Daya Bay Economics Development Zone in Guangdong. Due to unfinished property, they have launched up to 30 rights protection actions but have not made any progress so far. The on-site video shows that owners gathered at the gate of the development zone building, blocking government gate and shouting slogans such as "Give me back my house" and "Down with the profiteers." Now, as I mentioned earlier, this has been going on for almost 2 decades now, but the situation got bad a few years ago, and it has continued to get worse since then. You see, tariffs are not helping because people are getting laid off and only a little bit of savings that they did have, they put it into real estate because in China, real estate was one of the only things people could invest in. Why? Well, because a lot of the most profitable companies are owned by the CCP. CCP leaders don't want to put this on the public market because then they would have to share the money with Chinese citizens. So a lot of the companies are wholly state-owned. That means public doesn't get any benefits of the Chinese companies doing well. That's why Chinese citizens mainly invest in real estate. They just buy up houses after houses. Now, of course, there are some cultural issues at play too. Families in China use real estate as a way to plan for their retirement. Single guys with real estate are considered attractive choices for marriage, and amount of real estate you own is directly related to your social status in the society. Considering all this, you can see why real estate prices did continue to go up for most part of the last 2 decades in China. This actually kind of fed into the cycle. Once everyone started seeing that the real estate prices only go up, families started buying real estate even more because they wanted a piece of that profit. The rush to buy houses was so huge that the developers were selling out complexes before even breaking ground for construction. However, even after construction finished, the apartments just sat there empty because they had owners but no habitants. Demand was high because everyone wants to buy their second, third, or fourth home. They wanted to just get rich on this real estate boom. So supply increased drastically to match the demand, but a lot of these homes were sitting empty as owners were only buying these places in hopes of price appreciation. Based on one data set from 2022, Chinese families had around 70% of their wealth in real estate. You heard that right, 70%. Not much for diversification, I guess. Imagine if something were to happen to the real estate market. Well, this is where we talk about Evergrande. At one time, it was China's largest property developer. In fact, in 2018, they were actually the biggest real estate company in the whole of Asia. Now, when people look at something that big, they just assume it's all legitimate. Oftentimes, though, that's not the case. Here in America, we learned that lesson back in 2008. If one had looked under the hood, well, the Chinese investors learned that lesson with the Evergrande. If they had looked under the hood before the crash, they would have realized that some of the practices that company was carrying out were not exactly appropriate. Let me explain. Remember earlier how I mentioned because of fear of missing out, FOMO, people were buying houses before construction even began. So, usually a company like Evergrande would lease a piece of land from the local government because in China you cannot really buy land. Then that company would turn around and sell houses that are supposed to be built on that land and receive full payment for the houses before even breaking ground. Companies would never have any issues selling out because demand was just so high. People were more than happy to take out a mortgage and buy houses just in hopes of owning real estate someday in the future. Now, the big problem that starts here is that companies like Evergrande wouldn't actually use the money that they got from the sale to start construction. No, they would use that money as a down payment to lease even more land so they can sell even more apartments for the future. Now, hopefully you guys are starting to see the problem. Money that was supposed to be used to build the houses is now going towards buying more land. So where is the money gonna come to actually build the houses that Evergrande has actually sold? Well, Evergrande was hoping that the pyramid scheme will continue forever. But we know from basic math that it's literally not possible for a pyramid scheme to go on forever. At the end of the day, you just run out of people to sign up to your scheme. Chinese regulators should have caught this on way before it got so big, but this is where we have to talk about the second issue. You see, the local governments were directly benefiting from this real estate pyramid schemes that companies like Evergrande had going on. In China, one of the big ways local governments make money is by leasing out lands to developers like Evergrande. This meant that the more risk these real estate companies took on, the higher the bids on this land that the government was leasing out. Around 50% of local government's revenue was coming from leasing out lands. The same government that should have been protecting its citizens from these risky practices was directly benefiting heavily from so-called risky practices. This is a prime example of perverse incentives. And this was one of the main reasons why China's real estate bubble got so big. YouTube just dropped a mind-boggling announcement. It is paying creators $64 million per day. Why? Well, because YouTube doesn't have enough creators right now. That's why you see videos on your homepage that have less than 1,000 views, like this one. Now, of course, that doesn't mean everyone should start a channel. But if you have ever wondered about starting a YouTube channel or a faceless channel, now is the perfect time. YouTube is paying creators millions every single day, and it's pushing newer and smaller channels now more than ever. But I'm sure you have many questions on how to start and grow a channel. I get these questions in my email all the time from some of you guys. That's why we have decided to put all our YouTube advice into one training bootcamp for completely free. So if you're someone interested in starting your own YouTube channel, you can sign up for this bootcamp by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on your screen. This bootcamp is like a Zoom call, so it is limited to 100 people at a time, so be sure to sign up before it gets full. Now back to the video. Regulators were always slow to step in because it was directly benefiting them. And then when CCP did finally step in with its 3 red line policy, it was too little too late. Property developers had sold millions of houses and they didn't have the money to actually build them. This is why we continue to see protests like this one happening in China. Sadly, it seems that one of these protests did turn deadly. The secretary of Ayugua Subdistrict in Xinjiang District in Guangdong Province was beaten to death by protesters from an island at the entrance of the subdistrict office, another fatal incident. Now, a lot of the reports around this incident is suppressed by the CCP, and the ones I could find were in Chinese. So I'm going off of Google Translate, so forgive me if I mess something up, but it seems based on my research, this was relating to compensation that CCP was supposed to give out to petitioners whose houses were demolished. But it seems that this specific CCP official was involved in silencing the petitioners and making sure they don't get paid. I'm guessing some corruption was involved. So one of the angry petitioners waited outside the office on April 17th, and when he saw the official, that's when the incident happened. Now, as shocking as this was, to me, this wasn't even the most shocking part involving this beating. It was the reaction that the public had. According to an online YouTube report, it seems that the Chinese citizens were celebrating this beating, calling it that it must have been the CCP official who pushed this guy to his limits, and the officials love making life hard for the people. One comment even went as far as to put the whole blame on the CCP, saying that under economic hardship, the CCP's evil doing will spark public retaliation. This is where I want to talk about another stupid decision that CCP has made since this trade war started. One of my favorite stories is Xi Jinping banning Chinese airlines from buying Boeing planes, all the while he personally travels in Boeing planes. Well, Xi's answer is that all these Chinese airlines should be buying the Chinese aircraft manufacturer Comac and its flagship model C919 narrowbody jet. Well, here I have a perfect reason why they don't buy from the Chinese manufacturer. Here we have a Chinese 919 that literally fell into a farmland. Maybe this is the reason why Xi Jinping flies in a Boeing.